there's a talk given at Oxford in March 2022 in which a Dr. Dame June Rain, who is speaking on behalf of the regulatory agency in Great Britain known as the MHRA, that's the Medical and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the tagline for which is regulating medicines and medical devices. So this basically, if you're American, this sounds like the FDA, the analog to the FDA. She gives a talk about the MHRA, about the Medical and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, which remarkably she calls From Watchdog to Enabler, Regulation in COVID and After. So I've got 5 screenshots from the talk. And again, I'll link to the talk in the show notes as well. Associated with this screenshot with her introducing her talk here, she says, I'm going to talk about how the quote, how the COVID pandemic has catalyzed the transformation of a regulator from a watchdog to an enabler. And I was telling you about this, Brett. You were like, enabler of what? Like, of Pfizer, of the pharmaceutical companies. She's mostly talking about the Pfizer shots in this talk, but she also goes into talking about AstraZeneca a little bit, but almost entirely. She is talking about being proud to have moved a regulatory agency from understanding its role as that of watchdog to that of being an enabler of the developers of the treatments that are being brought to them, in this case, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
It's a classic case of saying the quiet part out loud.
It's unbelievable.
It's a jaw-dropping admission.
I recommend this. It's, it's 25 minutes or so, and you can skim parts of it. It's, sort of standard academic conference-y stuff. The next, and just a few screenshots here. Next screenshot, Zach. Here we have on the screen a couple of little speech bubbles. And what she says associated with this is, so I was dashing into number 10 for a meeting in the cabinet office, right? So she's important enough to be, that's number 10 Downing Street, of course. That's like saying, so I was dashing into the White House for a meeting at the cabinet office, if she was American. And in that meeting at number 10 in the cabinet office, she is asked, as it shows on screen, by someone, I didn't catch the name, will the MHRA stop us from killing people? And she immediately responded, no, the MHRA will help you keep people alive. And this is how she understands her role changing as a regulator, as a person who's helping lead a regulatory agency through an emergency, is no, I'm not going to put the brakes on. I'm going to speed things up. So again, proud enough of this to have it on screen. Okay, next screenshot. This is not all that informative. This has the tagline for MHRA, but what accompanies her saying this, what accompanies her showing these agencies that are collaborating now under her watchful guidance is, quote, we collaborated across these boundaries as never before. And she does say she knows we need to remain independent. That's really important. But then she says enthusiastically that, quote, we tore up the rule book. During COVID, we, the regulatory agency of Great Britain, tore up the rule book. Okay, next screenshot. So this shows the MHRA having facilitated, having allowed pharma to change the timing of clinical trials, whereas used to be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 1 had to actually be done before you went into phase 2, and phase 2 had to be done before you went into phase 3. She is proud of the fact that during COVID, under MHRA, they changed the guidelines so that now pharmaceutical companies could modify the timing of the clinical trial such that you could have the phases overlapping one another. And she says, quote, of the vaccines, which had begun to be manufactured well before even the first phase was done, first phase of the clinical trial was done, quote, large-scale manufacture was prepared at risk. We did not know if any of these vaccines would be effective, end quote. But surely everyone, even this audience, this small audience where she's giving this talk at Oxford in March of 2022 can see that at the point that the government has purchased in advance the large-scale manufacture of a whole bunch of vaccines, and they don't actually have the safety data yet, that it's going to be that much harder to say, actually, no, all of those have to go into the trash.
Hate to say it, But it's worse than that. It is. Because if you listen to this, knowing what has taken place during this process, right? If you know what we know now about what took place in the drug trials, for example, there was never any risk that these vaccines were not going to be safe and effective, right?
In which case, why not do this? Right?
Well,
like, why not just overlap phase 1, phase 2, phase
that's
3?
just the thing. This is pro forma. The idea is what we now have is a safety system incapable of recognizing a safety signal that is really just a laundering, a safety and effectiveness laundering apparatus that is effectively a branch of pharma. And if that sounds hyperbolic, I know in the U.S. that a tremendous percentage of the money that flows through the regulatory apparatus is actually pharma money, right? That the system has been built to fail, where the controls have been handed to pharma, the financial controls, the power of the purse, effectively. And what this sounds like to me, if you're pharma, then you ought to live in fear that the regulatory apparatus is going to be uncompelled that your product is safe and or effective.
That's what they're there for. And really, if you're pharma, you ought not live in fear, because you ought to know that the regulatory apparatus is there, and therefore you ought to do your damn job and produce a safe and effective product to begin with.
Right. But of course, the fiduciary responsibility of the corporation is clear, and the fact is it was very expedient from the point of view of taking care of their shareholders to capture the apparatus, so there was never any risk, right? That at a business level, that makes sense. It's criminal, but at a business level, it makes sense. And so if you were to do that, if there is a governmental regulatory apparatus, its purpose is to prevent dangerous and or ineffective treatments from making it to market. Pharma can't tolerate that because business is difficult. So it captures that apparatus. It's still, the zombies inside of that apparatus still exist. They still have to give speeches about their role in the process. And they have to occasionally wag their finger at pharma in order that they still look like a regulatory apparatus. But basically, what will they sound like to themselves, right? They will sound like they think it is clever that they tore up the rule book. Right? They will be proud of the fact that their watchdog role has been transformed into enabler, which surely is not the term she was looking for. Facilitator would have been...
It's literally in the title of the talk.
Right. So the point is, to the extent that people talk behind closed doors and they say things that they wouldn't and shouldn't in public, this is one of these cases where enabler sounds like internal language. It sounds like, frankly, pharma language, right? Actually, we're going to get the regulatory apparatus to function as an enabler of this process.
Well, maybe she's the Rochelle Walensky of
That is exactly what I'm getting. Let's put it this way. What pharma did is despicable, but it makes sense, right? What these people do is despicable, but it makes sense, right? These are careers that are being made. How is your career being made? Is it being made by being a good watchdog? No, that'll get you tossed out on your ear. Right? It's being made by transitioning your role from watchdog to enabler, right? That's how you rise. And so the point is, we are hearing this weird mixture of the internal dialogue and the public presentation of, the victory lap. And it's like, well, A, what are you taking a victory lap about? It's not like you distributed a product that worked.
Right.
It didn't. And what's more, it was hugely dangerous. So why are you championing the change in the process that you shepherded? But nonetheless, we get to hear it, and it does sound like what you would imagine a captured regulatory industry apparatus is like on the inside.
Yeah.
Right, as it rationalizes to itself its failure.
Totally. And actually, the last screenshot, which isn't a giant deal, but show it, Zach. Proudly discusses the agency's regulatory flexibilities, and that like enabler strikes me as a word that they really had and not publicized. They are, as you say, saying the quiet part out loud here, and yet, as easy as they're making it for those of us who are paying attention, still. still we are the ones who are considered to be purveyors of misdis, smell, and all the other bad types of information.
Yes, which of course have been declared terrorism.
Yes. I don't know if they have in Great Britain or not, but...
Well, I mean, Great Britain is one of the Five Eyes. No doubt terrorism here is terrorism there.
That's probably true.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that happened back in March 2022, and it's shocking, frankly. I'm no less shocked than if the FDA, I don't even know who the lead on the FDA is, but some equivalent person at the FDA to this woman at the FDA's analog in Great Britain had said these things. We are proudly moving. We're excited. We're excited to have thrown away the rule book, to have moved from watchdog capacity to enabler, to be engaging in regulatory flexibilities. And anyone is confused as to the lack of oversight and the fact that we don't actually, lots and lots of people ever more every day are saying, I don't actually trust you guys to make decisions on my behalf. No, not you, not now.
Yeah, well, one of the truly evil aspects of this is that many of us were calling attention to the evidence of what was going on as it happened. And the evidence was, of course, less than it is now. Right? But that was a very risky thing to do.
Right.
And we can now see that, what should be a alarm bell going off at the acknowledgement that, in fact, there are reproductive consequences to these products, and that ought to cause a rethink.
Probably temporary.
Probably temporary, right. But the point is, what you can see for sure now, with the amount of evidence that is currently available, even just to the general public, what you can see is that the system is completely indifferent to the risk it's putting citizens at. Completely indifferent. It is not changing its tune about whether or not you should be inoculated with this stuff based on the alarming evidence of the safety signal, based on the evidence of the ineffectiveness of the shots at preventing you from contracting or transmitting the disease.
It has yet to do any attempt at risk stratification analysis.
No evidence of risk stratification, which tells you right there that this process has nothing to do with health because the cost-benefit analysis is obviously risk stratified. Which
is just to say, again, like risk stratification by age, and this is something we've talked about before and many, many doctors have as well. We have known from the beginning that this virus is much more likely to bring you to your knees the older you are. Also the more comorbidities, but the risk stratification by age means that given that the virus is very unlikely to do you harm if you are a healthy young person, and also, separately, the vaccines seem to be more likely to do you harm the younger you are, risk stratification analysis would suggest that there should be different guidelines for, at the very least, different guidelines for whether or not you're expected to take this thing.
Steeply different.
Steeply different, and yet... most of the elite universities in the United States are now requiring not just vaccines, but boosters for their students, for their presumably young, healthy student populations? Are you trying to kill them? What is going on?
Right, it's insane. You should have, let's put it this way, the date, if there is an argument for these so-called vaccines at all, there should be an age at which the cost-benefit analysis flips enough in their favor that we recommend it. And that age should be in motion with the more evidence that we have. And the fact that that age doesn't exist at all, we're just like, oh, they're good, get them.
Yeah.
Right? That's like, well...
6 months old, get them. Pregnant, get it.
Right.
Yeah.
That is a manufacturer's view of a product. Is this product for you? Definitely.
Yes.
Right? There is it's not a question, well, who are you? Let's figure out whether this product is for you. You can see that. And so as long
as... Are you human? We got a thing for you.
As long as you can see that that is what's going on, that the thing is not interested in who you are, even though the evidence suggests that that should be the primary question in deciding whether or not to recommend it, and that it isn't just the manufacturers who are so indifferent to your well-being, it's the thing that is supposed to be protecting you. Once you've seen that, then the real question is, well, was that true from the start? What about all that shit you told me that turned out it wasn't right? Did you know it wasn't right?
Right.
Right? That's really the question. And I do hope we ultimately, I doubt we will ever get a full reckoning. But we have to try, because to the extent that the system that allowed this to happen is completely captured, and we are dependent on its functioning, not just this time, but next time, it won't be better next time unless we figure out what got into it.
That's right. No, and one of the recurring themes in that video that I showed you screenshots of from Oxford in March of 2022 is the rejoicing that during the next pandemic, and there will be a next one, she proclaims, and it's true, they've already got all these changes in place, so it'll be easier next time. It'll be easier next time to be the enabler, and no worries about them being a watchdog.